me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening. Welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70. It is that time of year where Alan Medlock tends to disappear. We thought we were going to have Alan tonight, and life got in the way. But it's the start of season 12, and if we're starting a season, that means we're starting it with Jeff Jones from the Belleville Democrat. Jeff, how are you tonight?
I'm good. As we record this, we're about, 45 minutes or so removed from the very exciting Ryne Stanek news as this goes to break here on a Friday evening. So good otherwise, waiting for shoes to drop all the live long day.
Yeah, I did not expect us necessarily to have such fresh topics to discuss. And maybe before we get too far, let's talk about this so that people can then eventually probably just cut off and just listen to the new stuff. But what were your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously he's numbers wise, and I didn't dug very far into it, but it looks like he struggled a little bit over the last couple of years. What are the Cardinals thinking here?
Yeah, the struggles have been that he kind of walks the world. That's sort of been the problem with him, and the thing that he has struggled with. But what they're seeing is a guy who has been around. He's got 9 big league seasons. He turns 35 in the middle of next season. He's a guy who's got a history with Chaim Bloom. He was a first round pick of the Rays in 2013, and then came up through their system. Was sort of quasi famous. His big claim to fame was he was the OG opener. He was the guy who had a lot of those assignments for the Rays when they were running out the opener there in the late 20 teens. And look, the Cardinals have been very explicit about wanting a veteran reliever who they can trust to be kind of a mentor down there and also pitch in some leverage spots. We saw Andrew Kittredge do this. We saw Phil Maton do this. Ryne Stanek is the newest version of it, and he throws 100, and if enough of them are strikes, then they will get what they want out of him, which is some, call it 40 innings of solid relief before he gets traded at the end of July. And if it works out well for him, then he goes back into the market next winter and has a shot at a pretty meaty deal the same way that Kittredge and Maton did. So this was relatively a no-brainer, I think, one that kind of makes sense for everybody involved.
Yeah, and it's really weird as a Cardinal fan to be always having that prism of this guy is signed with the idea that he probably won't be here at the end of the year, right? I mean, that
Sure.
seems to be a recurring theme of pretty much every free agent signing that they've had this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the best possible outcome from the Cardinals' perspective for Dustin May is that he makes 16 starts and gets traded, right? And, the best possible outcome for Ryne Stanek is that he pitches 30 times out of the bullpen and gets traded. That's sort of that's the reality of where they're at competitively right now, and what that, the ugly side of asset accumulation kind of looks like.
Yeah, we've kind of been on the other side of that for so long of bringing in somebody at the deadline that it is interesting to see. But it's smart, and I don't think that, and I think that's interesting too. Is that at least a large chunk of the fan base? It's never going to be unanimous, but it feels like a large chunk of the fan base is really on board with this idea that let's flip these guys. Let's get these guys in, flip them. Let's continue to bring in prospects and continue to build. John Mozeliak was famous for saying that St. Louis would never support a rebuild. It feels like right now they're kind of supporting it.
Yeah, we're going to see. I think that you and I both probably have more exposure to the kind of folks who are very dialed in on this sort of day-to-day, and who are maybe even more likely to be supportive of that kind of stance than the average bear would be. I'll be curious to see what it looks like once the season gets going, once we have a better grasp on the attendance numbers, once we figure out what the universe looks like once the TV thing shakes out. There's a lot of people who come to the ballpark every day who would consider themselves hardcore Cardinals fans if you ask them, who don't have the first idea what they've done this winter,
Right.
because that's just sort of not how they consume the team, right? And
Hmm.
so once those folks kind of dial back into it, I'll be really interested to see what the broader reaction is.
Yeah, I guess I kind of use as my, finger in the wind maybe is my father, who's, in his early 80s, but he still
Sure.
keeps track of the team. I don't know that he watched it last year, even though he paid for FanDuel. But just, he's 80. It's hard to do, but,
Right.
which is something that we'll get into with the TV stuff. But, and he's not, yeah, he probably won't, when I see him tomorrow or Monday or whatever, he won't be talking about Ryne Stanek. Um, but, he's also a guy that has watched the Cardinals a lot longer than a lot of these people and he remembers bad times. So it's like he's going to watch the Cardinals no matter. So in that regard, I guess it helps that the Cardinals have at least some part of a deep fan base that remembers the bad times.
Yeah, I've had this conversation before with Benjamin Hockman, and Benjamin is right about 5 years older than me, but that is a big enough difference that Benjamin at least has some waking memory of the end of the '80s teams and
Mhm.
and the Cardinals being good then. Whereas, as someone who was born 3 months before the '87 World Series, the Cardinals teams of my young childhood, basically until '96, were all pretty bad.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with Benjamin before that part of the reason that I never really had the same like connection to Ozzie Smith, for instance, that he has,
Mhm.
is that my recollection of Ozzie was old Ozzie, right?
Right.
Who
Right.
was not very good and who was fighting with Tony, and just seemed like things were bad all the time,
Right.
and that was sort of the initial thing that was in my head. So it's just such a different perspective, and there's going to be a whole generation of Cardinal fans who are going to be, like the folks who came up at that time or came up when the Cardinals were bad in the '70s, who are going to have an entirely different introduction to what this team looks like and what the standard is.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, 96 is amazingly enough 30 years back, right? And that's where we kind of mark this era of Cardinal baseball from starting. So to go deep into, yeah, the 80s, the 70s, those kind of teams that were bad. I mean, that's why we have Augie Nash, right, on, on Twitter. He can remind us of all these kind of things.
Yeah, I meet these guys from time to time, and it's like, oh yeah, I have no recollection of you having been here, but nice to meet you, right? Like
Yeah.
Ted Simmons, God bless him, is the patron saint of the 1970s
Mhm.
Cardinals, and somebody had to be.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, Ted Simmons predates me as well, so he's a guy that I know people have talked about, and I think I might remember a little bit from his Milwaukee days, but
Yeah.
again, that's the Cardinals have always done a really good job, I think, of embracing their history, even when that history hasn't been, successful on the field. The players that were good still get highlighted.
They have, and what's really interesting is that the traditional thing that a team does when they're rebuilding is to lean on that a little more, right? Like I
Mhm.
think people here locally can remember that when the Blues were at the bottom of the bottom in the middle of the aughts, all of a sudden they couldn't retire enough jersey numbers, right? They couldn't have enough giveaway nights. They couldn't have enough banners to put up in the rafters. It's because you got to get folks in the building somehow. The Cardinals, I think, are running a little short on that. So I don't know. I guess if you're a dead ender for the Scott Rowland jersey retirement, maybe you have that to look forward to in the next 18 months or so. But otherwise, we'll see what that looks like.
Well, and it also helps. This is what 20 years from 2006, and it's 15 years from 2011. You can hit on those anniversaries if you want to a little bit harder, maybe than you would have in a successful year.
Well, and believe me, we'll circle back to the plugs later. But the baseball writers' dinner is just about in a week and 2 days here, and we will have David Eckstein, Jeff Suppan, So Taguchi. Those guys are all coming to the baseball writers' dinner this year in celebration of that '06 team.
I think it'll be also interesting, and I don't know if there are people around, but are there any descendants from the 1926 team? 100 years since their first World Series. Are there descendants? Obviously, no players, but descendants or
Sure.
of that could be, much like we see when they go into the Cardinal Hall of Fame. A grandchild or something that can kind of hold that banner up.
What I'll say is there's a gentleman named Ed Wheatley who's a local historian who's been very involved, especially in maintaining the history of the St. Louis Browns. And when there are folks around who have those kind of familial connections to the Cardinals teams of the past, Ed has historically been a guy who we've heard from collectively as the baseball writers, as a as a reminder of those folks. And I don't believe we've heard from him. So if there's anybody around, then they're down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and much like the 1926 team, the 2026 team may not be actually viewed by anybody that's not in the stands. And I don't really mean that, but the Cardinals did, get out of their TV contract this week. I didn't realize until I guess the stories that came out with the missing payments, just how fragile this successor to Diamond Sports really was.
Well, I don't think they realized it either. Obviously, there had been some communication and some concerns about this, but all of this started last month when Main Street Sports, which is the name of the company that owns and operates what is now FanDuel Sports Network, which this is the first thing I think we should flag here, right? Because a thing I see online all the time is folks going, well, how can FanDuel not have money top? FanDuel's name is on is on the network. FanDuel does not operate the network, right? That's a licensing agreement. That's a marketing agreement. FanDuel's involvement starts and stops with the name and the logo and all that being plastered on the broadcast. The company that actually owns it, Main Street Sports, which previously was Diamond Holdings or whatever, missed a payment to the Cardinals in December that would have been, I believe, their first payment for 2026 rights. I know it was a 2026 payment, but I believe it was their first one. And this got out because NBA teams were made aware of it the next day. The NBA teams who are with Main Street had a conference call and where they were told, hey, they've missed a payment, be aware of this. At the same time, there was a negotiation going on between the folks who own Main Street and the network DAZN that you may remember, may have seen, DAZN. I know for a while when I think when it was still Fox Sports Midwest, I'm not entirely sure, they would have like programming takeovers or whatever. My understanding is they're fairly big in Europe with soccer programming and whatnot. But those negotiations broke down. And so with Main Street being in default of the contract, having not made a payment and having not made it whole, the Cardinals, and as I understand it, all of the other teams that were with Main Street opted out of their deal, voided their deals. What does that mean for the Cardinals in the short term? I mean, in the short term, it means that the money is a little bit tenuous, that they're not going to get what they thought they were going to get, like in December didn't come in. Though my understanding is that all of the teams who transferred their broadcast to MLB last season, and I got, if not made whole, made fairly close to, I think within 15% of whole of the broadcasting deals that they had previously signed. MLB was willing to pay them essentially the rights deals that they were expecting to receive. Now, is that perfect? It's not. The Cardinals are in a place where they're already cutting payroll to the extent that it probably doesn't whack them in the short term. What it does is creates a much more interesting situation for the longer term in that, the media rights stuff is going to be a big part of labor negotiation following this coming season and ahead of 2027. And so all this happening now and happening so dramatically tends to put this kind of front and center. What it means for Cardinal fans in the short term, and every time I've talked to anybody from the organization about this, the thing that they have begged us to stress is that the games will be on TV. They will have a streaming option that you can subscribe to in the same way that you were able to pay the $20 a month or whatever for FanDuel last year. And there will be the ability to watch the games. For the teams that have gone to an MLB-produced broadcast in the past, my understanding is that they have basically taken over like an extra cable channel and sort of just popped up on folks' cable guide. So I don't know as of yet, like what number channel they'll be on at your house if you're a person who does this. One potential upside to this is that for people who have subscriptions to a cable service that did not have a carriage agreement with FanDuel. Like, I have YouTube TV, and I have not been able to watch the Cardinals through YouTube TV, and I couldn't even tell you how long.
Right.
That is possibly going to be, I don't know that this will happen, but that can possibly be rectified because it will be a different carriage agreement. Obviously, MLB will be incentivized to get that in front of folks. So these are all things that are going to happen in the short term. The bottom line is whatever the solution is going to be a one-year solution, because consolidating these rights deals is going to be a big priority for the league as part of collective bargaining ahead of 27.
Yeah, I was reading some of the things, and when they were talking about maybe fixing this situation or renegotiating, there was some idea of, at least for the NBA teams, trying to stretch those rights out for another 2 or 3 years, but that just didn't seem tenable because the league is really, really focused on getting as many of those together, look like for 28 as they could, and this kind of plays into their hands quite a bit, and to some degree, it plays into the Cardinals' hands too, right? I mean, if the Cardinals, I mean, you're right. They've cut and they've cut. This is well away from that, $1.3 billion contract they signed a number of years ago. But if they were getting that same full TV revenue while putting out a payroll that was, maybe $100 million, if not less, would it be harder for them to feel like they could justify that, even though it's the right thing? The optics wouldn't be that great.
So I don't think it would be harder for them to justify it, in part because I think that they're just committed to it, and I don't think they're that worried about the optics of it. The other thing that I want to note here, and I've been kind of digging into this, and I asked a friend who works at FanGraphs and works on their database to run some of the numbers on this. The amount of cash the Cardinals have going out next season, exclusively at this point to the Red Sox, but the net amount of cash they have going out in the FanGraphs database, which I think goes back to 2018, I believe, is what I was shown, is the third largest amount of 1-year cash that any team has sent out in a given year. The one that I would have guessed was the 23 Mets are on that list because that was the Verlander and Scherzer dump. So they were higher. And one that I wouldn't have guessed, the Texas Rangers, and I believe 2021 shook off like the last year of Rougned Odor and some Kyle Gibson and some Ian Kennedy, and they're second place on that list. But the Cardinals, if they were to trade Nolan Arenado, it's not entirely. It's likely, in fact, that they could pass the Mets and could be in a spot where they will be sending out more cash next season to defray salaries traded away than any team has in the last 10 years of Major League Baseball, which is fascinating for a team that is a little strapped on its revenue stream and that is cutting payroll. They are sending out some cash. They're just not spending it on their current players. They're spending it to get prospects.
Which may be the most obvious sign that things are different, right? Because this is not something that the Cardinals would have done. Well, even 2 years ago, I don't think they, we even talked about even last offseason, they were going to probably send some with Nolan Arenado if a trade got happened, but probably not as much as they will this time around. It really feels like, Chaim Bloom and company have pointed out or laid it out for the DeWitts that this is the way baseball works now.
And I think the timing of it is so fascinating because it is for sure a big capital outlay. Now, granted, it's happening while they are cutting salary, right? So perhaps this is the year where you would want it to happen if ever it was going to happen, because there was never going to be a universe where they were going to go to get a $30 million a year player this winter. And so if you dump it all now and you unload all of it now, then it puts Bloom in a position where he has remarkably clean books heading in to next season. It's not totally impossible that Dustin May will end up being the only Cardinal who makes at least $10 million next season. Now they're paying $20 million on Sonny Gray or whatever it is, but Dustin May could be the only guy with an 8-figure salary. And, the Cardinals ideally would only be paying him $8.5 million of that before they trade him at the deadline anyway.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the season, they could have nobody under guarantee contract for the next year. I mean, obviously you'd have the ones that are still under team control, but which is it's just a really remarkable switch around, and done in such a quick fashion too. I know it's been kind of building over the last couple of years, but when they committed to it, and I think that's that's really I point in their favor that they didn't just try to halfway do it.
Yeah, they have not been hesitant. They have not been shy. They have cleared the decks at this point, and with many, and with decks still to clear. So
Right.
if you are a believer that this is the thing that's going to work for them, they have put themselves in a position to execute it with no excuses. They're there now.
So with the two big trades that have happened this offseason with Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras, what was your, kind of initial feeling on that, and has it changed at all? I know it probably hasn't, given there hasn't been a whole lot of extra data that has come in with it, but were you surprised at what they got back? Were you looking at something different? What did they look like for you?
None of it surprised me, to be honest. I think it is pretty much just about exactly what I would have expected. If there is a surprise to me, it is that they ate so much money on Gray.
Mhm.
But clearly they are pretty strong believers in Brandon Clark. That is the guy who they're willing to stretch to go get, and they made it happen. So okay, that's the assessment, and we'll see how that goes. Otherwise, no. I mean, it's you could have guessed a couple of other teams. Like I know for a fact that the Mets called on Wilson Contreras. They had some conversations there, and you could sort of see what the Cardinals got back in those deals. Right? They got back guys who can pitch in the big leagues right now and be
Mhm.
serviceable, and then guys who they can dream on. There really is a lot of similarity in the returns between those two players. So you know, it, this is what it looks like when you're talking about a team that is rebuilding and trading these kinds of veterans. And neither of the guys that they traded, both are going to be solid contributors to the Red Sox in 2026, but neither one of them at this point in their careers are like world beating players, right? Like these are
Mhm.
supplementary players on a really good team, and they'll be good in those roles in Boston. And the Cardinals just have to hope that they get the development right with the guys they got back.
Yeah, it is definitely a big bet on the development system, and obviously they feel pretty confident in that, and they should. I mean, they've put it together, and to be fair, it hasn't had a whole lot of chance to fail yet, and the little bit that we have seen has been positive. Um, I guess those are trades that made sense, but obviously Brendan Donovan is still sitting out there, kind of like that, tantalizing thing. What kind of return does that look like? Because I figure it's going to be somewhat different.
Yeah, that is a really interesting one to me, especially, in talking to Bloom after the Contreras trade, where he kind of made a point to point out that they're not only interested in trading for pitchers, they'd be happy to take position players too, who they think can be a part of their core moving forward. So, to me, what that says is that a Donovan deal wouldn't have to be headlined by pitching in the same way that the other two were. Now, for those sorts of high potential position players, maybe you're talking about guys who are going to be a little further off. Maybe instead of getting guys back for Donovan who are going to be immediate contributors, you're talking about position players who might be 19, 20 years old, and could be a couple, 3 seasons away from being contributors. Maybe they feel like that's something that they can pull off, because realistically, it's sort of hard to see what that fit looks like, especially if the goal with Donovan, and it should be, is to maximize, right? Like the reason to
Mhm.
trade Donovan now is because you believe that you can get the most for him now as opposed to at the deadline or next winter. Now, next winter is complicated because if there is a lockout next winter that shuts down the business of baseball for a couple of months, that's a
Mhm.
difficult spot to be in if you're a team that's looking to trade a guy, right? Especially without having a real clear view of maybe what the economic system is going to look like on the other end of that lockout. It makes sense to get the Donovan business done this year, where you have a little more comfort operating under under the system that you understand now. So I think that also is part of the reason why moving Donovan with the 2 full years of control, getting it done this winter, is pretty important for them.
Yeah, and you say maximizes the return when you have 2 years versus even a year and a half, and you take some risk off I mean, not that
Right.
Donovan is necessarily prone to being hurt, but he was hurt at the end of last year, and you would hate for, some sort of thing like that to pop up again and kind of tank the value on him, and, that would be difficult. So, I mean, it's getting down to, though, winter warm up, and of course, we're just a little over a month from pitchers and catchers. Um, is there a desire to get him done quickly, or do you think they could even drag it into spring training?
So I haven't been told this. My inclination would be if it gets to spring training, I wouldn't be surprised if they held him until the deadline, just because if it gets to spring, then what that tells me is that nobody was willing to meet their price in the short term. And I'm not sure why that would change in spring, barring like injury, right? Barring there
Mhm.
being a team that has a guy, like Gavin Lux blew out in spring 3 years ago, whatever it was. Mine is something like that. Then maybe the better move is to wait for the deadline to see if teams get desperate again. I do think that there are some sort of light indicators here, especially in the last day, that maybe it is pointed that direction. You had the reports this morning that the Diamondbacks are taking Ketel Marte off of the trade block. So that's one option that is maybe no longer out there for teams. It's starting to feel like some of the action is picking up around Bo Bichette and Alex Bregman. Both there was reporting today that Bo Bichette has meetings with the Phillies here in the coming days. That the Yankees are looking at Bo Bichette. Basically, these teams are all kind of waking up from the slumber of the Christmas and New Year holidays. And also, it's getting down to a point where players are getting nervous about not knowing where they're going in spring. And we've seen historically guys who sign into spring generally have a much tougher time of it than guys who get it done well ahead of time and can have a full camp and get adjusted and all that. So teams are going to leverage that, and that is going to make the free agent market move a little. And all of these things are interconnected, right? Bichette affects Donovan because he's an infield option that's out there. And if Bichette goes, then that's a team that's not going to need Donovan, and so the trade market changes. So all of these things kind of happen together and can create gridlock, but also can all start to move once one of them breaks free.
Yeah, the first domino has to go. And again, another reason not to let it linger too much for spring training is spring training is going to be different this year with a lot of players gone for World Baseball Classic. You might get into spring and not have a chance to really face significant competition to get ready for the season. So, especially if you're going late. Yeah, I think that's interesting. But then, how many dominoes have to fall before Nolan Arenado moves?
So that is a really interesting question. There has not been, as far as I am aware, a whole lot of traction on Arenado thus far. I know there has been some reporting about the Angels. That makes sense to a degree. They got to where they got to with Anthony Rendon, and he's not going to be around the team this year.
Mhm.
So they're going to need a third baseman of some form or fashion. Last year, I think that Arenado was pretty dialed in on a list of teams that were not only in good destinations for him, but that were also going to be, I think, really competitive. And I think that has maybe expanded a little. I don't think he's not wanting to leave St. Louis to go to a situation where things are just as bad, right?
Right,
So that
right.
that is not it's not a just send me anywhere situation with him. At the same time, I think that he is a little more open to some things. One thing that stuck out to me, I believe it was last weekend, Hein Bloom was on KMOX and was talking to Tom Ackerman and was asked about Nolan Arenado. And he led the discussion with, well, first and foremost, I believe Nolan is a Hall of Famer and he's going to get there someday, and this, that, and the other thing. This is not a thing that I think Nolan would ever acknowledge, but I do wonder if for him there is something to not wanting to kind of limp to the line, right, and,
Mhm.
and wanting to finish his career in a strong stop, in a strong stop, because the Hall of Fame thing is going to matter. I don't think it's a particularly close call with him. I think that I think that he is just a yes. That's top of my head without having looked at it really all that closely, but that is the sort of thing that is going to matter to him for sure. And I think that finishing in a way that reflects better on him is maybe going to be a little bit on his mind, and that is going to impact what some of these destinations look like. That, frankly, is part of why Houston would have made so much sense last year, because that is a ballpark where he can just kind of take aim and the homer and
Mhm.
doubles numbers are going to go just going to go up, because a lot of those tailing line drives that he hits down the line at Busch Stadium that get caught or that fall into the corner would clank off that scoreboard in Houston, right?
Right.
Obviously, that didn't work out. They're not in a spot now where that would ever happen again, given that Carlos Correa is back there. But something like that fits is about what that needs to look like in order for that to happen.
We have seen a couple of national writers say the Cardinals might just have to release him. I know that Chaim Bloom has said that's not on the table. Is that not on the table, or is that, a bargaining chip to keep in your hand that you don't tell it's on the table?
So what I'll say about this is that there is a way for Chaim to answer the question without answering the question that still gets him to the same leverage spot. The way that he has answered the question definitively with no wiggle room at all.
Mm-hmm.
If that turns out not to be the case, then it will be a pretty big lesson, I think, for those of us who cover the team to learn about the way he communicates, because there would be really no way to characterize that other than as a lie if they were to release him at this point, right? Which, if that's the case, then okay, but that's something for us to clock for the future. I think also, I talked about this before, but they are handing out a lot of cash this year in terms of outlay to the Red Sox, and that's part of the deal, and that's part, they're going to have to lay out some cash to Nolan no matter what, but he's still owed, it's $42 million over the next 2 seasons. There are some deferrals on his deal. I don't know exactly what the pay schedule is, but it's pretty close to that. And they're still owed $5 million from Colorado. So that's a net $37 million. And that would be a hell of a check to just have to write to get him to go away, on top of the $24 million that they're already going to be sending to Boston, right? We're talking then about $60 million in dead money and $60 million in players this year to go away. That, look, it's one thing to pay extra for prospects that you believe are going to be helpful for you in the future. It's something entirely different to write a check for $37 million for a guy to just go away. And I am not entirely sure that ownership has the stomach for that. I think ownership would much rather just see him out there than to pay for him to go away to that sense. So that I really don't see it. I understand the logic for it. That's the reason I've asked about it twice. I understand why that would maybe be the only way to clear up that problem. But frankly, the way in which he kind of gums up the roster is probably not significant enough for it to be worth it to them to write a check that big.
Well, and it kind of also loops back to what we were talking about earlier. They need to have reasons for people to come to the ballpark, and if you're looking at the casual fans that Nolan Arenado still has some cachet for, to go and watch him play third base, even if he's not hitting. I mean, that's not necessarily going to make his salary, palatable, but it's not nothing either.
No, it's not. And it would be really hard for them to sell that to a very casual fan. It's fairly easy to sell. Look at these prospects we got. We're going to get younger. We're going to get better. It's really hard to sell. We released a Hall of Famer so that Nolan Gorman could play more. That's hard. That's really hard, and I don't know that they're in a spot to do that.
Yeah, and as a Nolan Arenado fan, I hope they don't. Now, that being said, that makes Ollie Marmol's job a little bit harder, because I mean, just because Nolan's on the roster doesn't mean he's the everyday starter anymore either, right? I mean, his salary would seem to indicate that, but if you need to get Nolan Gorman in there, I think that probably takes some precedence.
Yeah, what I would say is we will see. I have a really hard time imagining Nolan Arenado not just being the starting third baseman if he is on the roster. I also think that there are, in fact, I know that there are people around the Cardinals who don't think that there is a lot more blood to get out of the Nolan Gorman stone. I think that there are people who think that this is the guy who he is. That, the last 3 years is 1,200 plate appearances of a 34% strikeout rate, and is that just going to be too much to ever fix? I think there are people who think that too, and so it's I guess what I would say is it's a lot easier for me to imagine a scenario where Nolan Arenado stays and Nolan Gorman just sort of gets shoved to the side than it is to imagine a scenario where Arenado is, I don't know, platooning or something, or
Right.
DHing some days or playing some first base. That does not track for me really.
You were talking about the infield a lot. You just wrote about JJ Wetherholt not too long ago. And you said, and I may not have it exactly right, but it was something to the fact that he's probably the most important prospect since Yadier Molina. Is that mainly because of what he means to this idea of transition, or is it something else?
I think it's because in a lot of ways, if JJ Wetherholt is the player that they think that he is, that baseball thinks that he is, then that changes the timeline for this team to be rebuilding. Because if JJ
Mhm.
Wetherholt is that guy, if JJ Wetherholt is, this is a comparison that sticks in my head, and it's probably not a fair comparison because the guy I'm about to mention has hit like I think 36 homers in a big league season. But if he's like 95% of Gunnar Henderson, if he's that guy, then that is a franchise changer. That puts the Cardinals on a path to be competitive in, I don't know, 2 years, maybe 3. If he's not that guy, if he's just a sort of like a 12-year starting infielder who's really good, if he's Brendan Donovan, right? If that's
Mhm.
if that's what JJ Wetherholt is, then that radically changes, for me at least, what this time frame looks like, because that is the only really superstar level talent that they have on the position player side in the system, unless you're talking about like maybe the young catcher, talking about Randy Rodriguez, or if Josh Baez next year takes another leap the same
Mhm.
size, sure. But right now, Weatherholt has to be that guy for them to recover from this at the speed that they think that they can.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're right. There are some intriguing things on the mound coming up, but Weatherholt does seem to be the only guy that has that kind of star credential in the minor leagues right now. How worried and could we, probably shouldn't be, that he's going to follow a path that's very similar to the last guy that was so highly hyped, which is Jordan Walker?
Yeah, I guess I don't have that worry yet for a couple of reasons. Number one, Walker never did it at AAA, right? We saw
Right,
Weatherholt do
right.
it at AAA and improve from AA to AAA at the end of last year. Um, Weatherholt is also 2 full years older than Walker was when Walker made his big league debut. Maybe like 2.5. I'd have to look, but he's significantly older. Has the college ball polish finish. Like they're at very different points in their careers, and also Walker kind of always had the hole that he has. There was just sort of an assumption or whatever, an analysis, a calculus made that he was going to be able to overcome it, that he was going to be able to develop the hit tool of recognition well enough that he was going to mitigate a lot of that swing and miss and a lot of that pitch decision stuff, and it just hasn't happened yet. So it hasn't gone away, but
Mhm.
Weatherholt doesn't have that same sort of hole in his game. His floor, I guess I would say, is a lot higher maybe than folks would have said Walker's was 3-4 years ago.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess there's still that concern with Walker because, last year was the runway season and it never really took off. What does that look like for him this year? Is it, throw him out there every day and see what it looks like at the end of the year, or is it some sort of restart for him?
I think Jordan Walker is going to start the season in pretty much the exact same place he started last season, which is to say they're going to give him every opportunity to demonstrate that he can give them what they think he can give them, or at least a reasonable facsimile of that. I don't know necessarily if it lasts the entire season, if it looks in the same way that it did last year. I
Mm,
also know that part of the thinking with Jordan Walker, who now has, who just has one more minor league option remaining, is that a good a reason to keep him on the big league roster is that if it goes bad and he has to be traded, he is more valuable with an option than without one.
mm,
So if it puts them in a better place to both protect the asset and to see what he can do, then great. And I also know that, in talking to folks about Walker, there's a pretty strong belief around the organization that the things that he needs to get better at, he's just not going to be able to improve at AAA. That the pitchers at AAA are either trying to get themselves into the big leagues, and so they're all trying to throw strikes, and so he can feast in the strike zone, or they're not going to hit spots the same way big league pitchers are, right? So,
Right.
it's a lot easier to spin that down in a way breaking ball at AAA because those guys are going to miss. The guys in the big leagues, every once in a while, those are going to be strikes, and that is part of the reason why he gets chewed up on that part of the plate, because when those things get dotted up, he doesn't want to be caught looking at them. So, that is a not AAA solvable skill in the eyes of some folks around the Cardinals, and so that puts Walker in a position where their belief is that the best thing they can do is to have him in the big leagues and let him work through it.
And that's of course, again, another season that it doesn't really matter how that works, so he can do that. But um, I think it's going to be very interesting. I guess this is like it really is a make or break year for him, at least in St. Louis, because it doesn't feel like
For sure.
another year like last year. Like you said, he might be either traded or somehow else not in the system if this is still the same guy he is.
Yeah, if the first 3 months of this season look like what last season looked like, then I think you pretty well have to make a change, because at that point it becomes clear that it's just not working here the way that it would have to work for him to be a productive big leaguer, to say nothing of like a star.
Which is, and again, after Dylan Carlson, to have that happen, and Nolan Gorman as well, to have a number of high profile guys just come and flame out. I mean, one, it's a testament to where the development program was, at least. But two, it's just, I mean, it's just frustrating, and why the Cardinals are kind of in this position, because like you said, with Wetherholt, if one of these guys had hit, the whole project looks a lot different.
It's so interesting now to talk to folks around the Cardinals about particularly Carlson, a little bit about Gorman. It's a little more circumspect with Gorman because he's still here, obviously. But the argument that you hear with Carlson was that he never had good exit velocities in the minor leagues. Nothing about his underlying batted ball data showed you that he would be an impact hitter in the big leagues at all, but that he was pretty good at getting the bat to the ball, and so the hope was that he would develop it and spray it around. And he just never did. Never got stronger, never got better exit velos, never got the ball in the barrel, and really never made solid enough contact. And that was, to hear the Cardinals tell it now, after it already has gone bad and the guy's left town, that was always a concern that they had, and they were never sure that he was going to be able to be that guy. In much the same way that with Gorman, he might just be a 35% whiff guy, which is probably not playable. Right, he's probably not a good enough defender that even with his prodigious power, they can carry a guy with his whiff percentage unless it gets better. And if that's the case, then that's the case. And I think there are some folks who are relatively confident that they have learned that, but I also think that there are folks who recognize that there really isn't anyone else in the system. Again, maybe Josh Baez, maybe Rainiel Rodriguez, who is 18. There's nobody else in the system that has that kind of power tool. And so Gorman gets a lot of opportunity to access it because he's got a superpower that nobody else has.
Yeah. Yeah, but but if you can't stay on the field, then it doesn't really matter. So, yeah, he gets kind of caught in that. And again, it's one of those things where you almost wish he had been, even 20% better, because then he's got a market this winter. But right now, besides just giving him away, there's nothing else you could do.
Yeah, there's really not. There would have to be a team that was relatively confident that they saw a flaw they could fix in Gorman. I know that teams have called on him, and I know that the offers have not been good enough to warrant much discussion really at all at this point. So that market just seems to not really be there, which makes sense given kind of the trajectory of his last couple of seasons.
Yeah. To finish up with the hitters, how does the catching situation shake out this coming year? I mean, the Cardinals have said that they are committed to at least letting Ivan Herrera catch some. Pedro Pajes is still here. They re-sign El Pozo. Jimmy Crooks has had some major league experience, and that's not even talking about Bernal and Rodriguez, who are probably at least a year or more away. How does that all? Is this another 3 catcher situation type of year, or how does it all work?
What I'm really interested in with this is how the World Baseball Classic is going to affect it, because Ivan Herrera is going to go play for Panama in the WBC. So he is going to be in camp for a month, a little less than, before he takes off for the WBC. And so will they see in that month what they need to see to make a call there, right? Like he is committed to catching. He wants to do it. That was a conversation that we had with Bloom at the winter meetings, was like, look, sometimes guys catch because they can do it and you have to talk them into it. Herrera wants to catch. That is the thing that he wants to do. And the closest I think that Bloom has come to being openly critical of the previous administration was in the midst of that conversation where he said that Herrera, I'm paraphrasing, but pretty close, said that Herrera was never given the tools to be successful as a big league catcher. That he just didn't have the opportunity because of the way the development staff cuts happened, and that he just didn't have the kind of coaching that they think he needs to be that guy in the big leagues. So, can they learn what they need to learn in 3 weeks before the WBC? And then, granted, I don't think anybody expects Panama to be a big player in this tournament. So maybe he's only out of camp for 10 days or whatever. But he is going to be gone for a stretch. And so, we'll see how it works out. I think that Bernal is going to be the priority catcher in Memphis, likely with Pozo as kind of the veteran third there, to be the other guy, to be the call-up if somebody gets hurt and someone needs to sit on the bench. Pages is going to be in the big leagues. Jimmy Crooks is an interesting question. I can definitely imagine a three catcher kind of setup, especially given that, Crooks has the lefty bat, so you can work him in as an extra lefty on some days. If you're talking about days where there's a tough platoon split, maybe Crooks is your catcher and you have, say, Herrera is DH with Burleson playing first. There are ways to do it. I don't know that necessarily it benefits Jimmy Crooks, other than he gets to be in the big leagues to spend a year where he catches 30 games or whatever. I don't know that necessarily is what's best for his development. And I know that he definitely has his champions. He has his backers around the team as well, in terms of being a guy who they really like for handling the staff and all that. So, that is an area where, given the depth they have at the upper levels, you could maybe see a trade that changes some of that. Maybe in one of these other trades, you have a team out there who really likes Pedro Pages or really likes Jimmy Crooks, and they go along with a Donovan or a Romero or even an Arenado. That wouldn't shock me necessarily, but I think you could also imagine a 3-player setup fairly easily, especially given that, assuming that Wetherholt is on this team, which I think is exceedingly likely, as long as spring doesn't go badly for him, he also offers you flexibility because he can back up short. So you can have a little more to play with in terms of the bench.
That makes sense. Yeah, when they said that Herrera was going to catch it, or at least was going to prepare to catch, it kind of had that feeling like they always told Trevor Rosenthal to come to camp prepared to be a starter, and then it never started.
Yes.
I kind of had that feeling like they're going to I wouldn't say humor, but it was almost that idea of, you prepare to catch, but it very well may be that, after 2 weeks, you're DHing and first basing again.
I had pretty much that exact same feeling, but that does not appear to be the case. They appear to be at least fairly into giving him a real shot to do it.
Yeah. Which, again, new people in charge, so some of the same words don't have the same loaded meanings, I guess.
Sure.
To look at the rotation, what's that going to be like? I mean, is it going to be as bad as it very well may be?
I think the thing that stands out to me is that they were entirely healthy last season. They did not have a starter get hurt last season, right? That is so unlikely to repeat. Like, somebody is going to get hurt. That's just how that goes. And so the depth is going to get tested, and immediately that is going to raise some questions. I think as we sit here today, I would project your rotation to be Liberatore, May, McGreevy, Kyle Leahy, and probably Hunter Dobbins, if Dobbins is healthy enough to go on opening day. He tore his ACL covering first base in June last year, had surgery, was about to get up on the mound. I know he's been throwing flat grounds and stuff. He seems to think that he's going to be fine to go. The Cardinals are not in any hurry to rush him because they just don't have to be. So they can let that drag out a little bit. But they want Leahy to win a spot. He's going to have every opportunity to win a spot. McGreevy's going to start. Liberatore's going to start. May's going to start. And so you're talking about Fitz kind of on the outside. You're talking about Andre Palante kind of on the outside. And then after that, you're getting into the Memphis rotation. And, as we saw last year, there were a lot of guys in their 30s making a lot of starts for Memphis down the stretch because they just didn't have that depth that they would need. And if they had at any point had 2 or 3 starters on the IL at the same time last year, they would have been in like Curtis Taylor getting starts in the big leagues territory, which is not where they wanted to be. So, we'll see. I would expect them to maybe to make even another ad there, some sort of veteran who they can be confident would take a chunk of innings for them. Miles Michaelis, but not Miles Michaelis, right? Sort of seems like to be the kind of guy that they're gonna be after, and they're gonna hope that gives them enough depth. But yeah, as we sit here on January 9th or whatever, I think Matthew Liberatore is probably the opening day starter, which is probably an indication of where they're at.
How do you feel about the Kyle Leahy transformation? Because I'm still very skeptical about it.
I'm interested to see it. I understand the rationale for it. I understand why you would look at his stuff and look at his pedigree, a guy who had started basically forever until they had a bullpen need in 23 or 20, whenever it was. I get it. I get why he would want to do it for sure. And I think last year, as you saw him improve, post really good results, get hit a little, but then figure it out and have adjustments for the adjustments. The fact that Leahy finished strong last year rather than getting blown up in June and then limping across the line, that says to me that he at least has enough understanding of himself and the things that he needs to do on the mound, that there's a shot that it can work. And so I'm open to it. I think that, it's entirely possible that it's not going to work out, but it doesn't shock me, and I do think it makes sense.
Well, and like you said, when the depth is not necessarily there, and there are definitely injuries coming, then it is a good idea to have some people available that can. I mean, because if something happens, he can switch back to the bullpen without much trouble.
He can for sure. Yeah, I think the other one that I think is worth noting here is that they are looking at Gordon Graceffo as a reliever. Like the days of him being a starting option are pretty well over. That is not in the cards for him at present in St. Louis. So he comes out of that pile, which is just another guy that they're going to have to backfill. Now, they would love it if Quinn Matthews made 15 starts for this team this season, because that would tell them that he really had a strong kind of rebound from, they would not say a lost year last year, but certainly statistically not the kind of year that you were hoping for out of Quinn Matthews.
Right. Yeah, but Matthews would be a mid-season, I mean, at best, right? I mean, because you're right, they want to see that he has turned whatever corner or bounced back or however you want to phrase it, with a decent number, 2 or 3 months worth of starts in Memphis, I would think, before they'd want to pull him up.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. He had a really strong spring last year, and then basically as camp broke, got out of his mechanics, and things were really kind of out of whack as the minor league season started. If he has another strong spring this year, then maybe he is an option in April or May, especially if the carryover is good as opposed to a step back this year. I think that they would be open to that being a possibility.
Well, before we wrap up, we have not talked about the biggest loss in St. Louis this winter, and that was in the press box. What's it going to be like not having Katie Wu around to bug?
It's going to be a little bit different. Fewer television hits happening all around us all of the time. It's the right way to describe all. There's so many things that I shouldn't say on a podcast.
Nobody's listening.
We're gonna miss her very much. She started to let us know. Probably should. She started to let us know as early as like August, September that this was probably going to be what was going to happen. So I've had my chance to be very excited for her and to be bummed that she is not going to be around anymore. But life, as they say, finds a way, or however the saying goes. I have found myself all of a sudden I'm one of the old guys now. If
I
you
was about
you
to
know
say.
if you don't count the columnists, I've been on the beat with this team the third longest of anybody in that press box, and Rob Raines doesn't really travel during the season anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
among the folk who travel, it's pretty much just me and Derek at this point who have been around more than 5 years or so. So that happened in a hurry.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting because St. Louis is a place that the media has tended to stick around.
It has.
But when the changes come quick, right? I mean, we've had a lot of turnover over the last few years, and yeah, I was thinking about that just recently. That you are the old hand to some degree, and you have to keep Denton in line, and I guess that's probably a difficult thing to do.
Mr. Pickleball is having himself quite a winter. I spoke to him this morning, and he mentioned that he was playing down in Florida today with a gentleman who had a walking boot on, and I told him he probably ought to be careful because it's not like it would totally be beyond him to be the old man playing pickleball with the walking boot on. That's very much up John Denton's alley.
So, I mean, do you know if there's going to be an addition to the, through the Athletic? Are y'all going to have to break in a rookie, or is this, just going to change the dynamic at all?
I guess we'll see. That job has not yet been posted. I know that Katie has expressed, I think publicly, that the hope is that they will fill it, and we will see what that looks like.
Well, good luck bringing the new one to heel, whoever it may be. And Jeff, it's been it's been a pleasure. I appreciate it. When do you head down to Florida?
I arrive in Florida on February 8th, Super Bowl Sunday. So I think I leave on the 7th. It's usually a 2-day drive down, and I always tell myself a 2-day drive back, and I end up doing it back in one. Last year I did it back. It's about 16 and a half hours. Did it back in one last year when I got home. I was like, I got to stop doing that. So my strong hope is to do it back in 2 again this year. But February 7th is when I leave.
Yeah, that pull of home is definitely makes you want to just keep pushing through. I absolutely know that. So, and then I guess winter warm up next week will, you'll get a lot of activity there before you get a chance to pack up.
I will. Everybody will, and this is where I will say that the baseball writers' dinner is that Sunday night, the 18th. Is my math right? It is the 18th, the Sunday night at the Missouri Athletic Club. Tickets are on sale. It's stlewisbbwaa.com. Mason Wynn will be there. JJ Wetherholt will be there. Alec Burleson will be there. Jeff Suppan, David Eckstein, Tony La Russa, So Taguchi. Who am I missing? Bryson Motts will be there. I said Mace. I said Burley. Michael McGreevy will be there. So it'll be a good collection of folks. We always have a fantastic time. It is sincerely one of my favorite nights of the year every year. So if you are all interested, please give it a shot. We would love to have you.
Yeah, the Cardinals have let bloggers be credentialed for a winter warm-up for about, I think this is 13, 14 years. I know at least once or twice that, whoever's gone has also bought tickets and gone to the dinner as well, and has had a great time. So, I mean, you're sitting around with, baseball people doing baseball things. It's really hard to have a bad time. I mean, unless you're in Chicago, I guess. But so yeah, if you're in the area and have the money, go hit up Jeff's hit up the website, buy you some tickets, and go on into it.
And if you are on the fence, send me a message on Twitter on Blue Sky. We may still have a couple of discount codes even we could send to folks to give you a little nudge down that line and give it a try this year.
There you go. No excuses. So, all right, Jeff, appreciate it, and have another successful year.
We'll do our very best, and we'll see how success gets measured as this season goes on.
Yeah, that we'll have to find different ways to measure it probably a little bit this year. All right, next week, Matt Pauley's going to join us. So until then, for Jeff, I'm Daniel. Good night. Hey everyone, Daniel here. Appreciate you listening to the show, and if you are a regular listener, great to have you. If you're a first timer, hope you come back. We would love it if you would rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. Either click some stars or give us a write-up. That would be awesome. It helps to get the show spread a little bit farther. And, heck, we just like the feedback. I'm going to be honest with you. So if you haven't done that, please do. Give it a shot. You can find us anywhere you find podcasts for the most part. We're also on YouTube. If you're interested in, putting this on in the background, there's no video with it yet. Hopefully never will be. I don't think you want that, but, who knows? You can find us, search for Meet Me at Musial, or you can look for Daniel Shoptaw under my personal account. But the shows upload there, so if you want to listen to it there, you can. Contact Alan or Daniel or me. That's me, Daniel. You can contact us at any time at C70 at AMedlock1. You can follow the Twitter account of the Musial at Meet Me at Musial. And thanks for being a listener. Appreciate it, and talk at you later.
In the air to right center. Back at the wall. It is off the base of the wall. The Cardinals are going to take the lead. Carpenter has emptied the bases, and with the 3-run double, St. Louis jumps on top. And it's Carpenter again.